Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Good evening. My name is Russell Brooks. Tonight's show will be a departure from the normal fare for Inside Scoop. Rather than discussing local political matters, we will delve into international trade. Trade policy under the Trump administration is of greater concern for most Americans than perhaps ever before, due to the president's use of tariffs on the rest of the world, including our largest trading partners. What are the costs and benefits of these tariffs? How will they affect most Americans? To help us with these questions and many more is Dr. Robert Thompson, an international trade economist who spent his entire career researching and teaching on international economics. Dr. Thompson earned his Bachelor of Science from Cornell University and his doctorate from Purdue University. Dr. Thompson, welcome to Inside Scoop.
Thanks very much. I'm glad to be here.
We are glad to have you. Let's start with the easy question. Why did you decide to become an economist?
Well, I grew up in a small family dairy farm and went to Cornell University as an undergraduate, and that really opened my eyes to the world economy. I studied agricultural economics first at Cornell, and my major professor was working on India. I got very interested in what the Indian economy was doing. Then I went to Purdue University for my master's and worked on a Brazil topic, and got very interested in international agricultural development, international trade in agricultural commodities. And then I got into balance of payments and exchange rates, and just my fascination just grew the longer I worked on these issues. Then spent a couple of years in Southeast Asia before going back for PhD. And with a study abroad in Denmark 1 year, 2 years in Laos, 2 years in Brazil, I was hooked in my interest in international economics.
Okay, you're very well traveled. But what fascinates you about international trade?
We have every country has its comparative advantage. It's things that it does uniquely well relative to other countries. It may be because they have more favorable climatic conditions or soils, or have invested in education and infrastructure, and why some countries ship what to whom has always been a source of fascination. But then we overlay that with the government policies that sort of screw up what economic logic would say countries ought to be doing. And I just became more and more excited about that as I studied it. I don't think there's any sector that's more distorted than agriculture, which is sort of where I started my career. But then every country undergoes economic development process where it starts with the bulk of people engaged in farming. Then there's a shift into manufacturing, and then over time into services. And working in countries at all levels of development, I just became fascinated how that machine works and how the percentages change over time.
Now, when President Trump speaks about trade, he usually describes it as a ripoff for the United States, suggesting that other countries are taking advantage of us. Is this your perspective about trade? And if not, why not?
No, it's definitely not my perspective. My sense is the United States has benefited enormously from international trade. We're very good at making many things, but we're also not as good as some others in making other things. As you gain
comparative advantage,
that's what comparative advantage is all about. And so by producing that which you do most efficiently and exchange it for what other countries do, everybody gains. The president often talks about trade as if it's a zero-sum game, and nothing could be further from the truth. The reality is that by each country specializing in what they do relatively better than other countries, everybody gains. You have a higher level of living, better standard of living than you could have if you tried to grow everything. If you use an agricultural example, just think if we tried to be self-sufficient in bananas or in products that you can only grow in the tropics. It would make no sense because they would have to be extremely expensive to justify growing them in greenhouses.
Sure. As you know, President Trump puts a lot of emphasis on bilateral trade deficits, regardless of the country involved. So whether we're speaking of Canada or South Korea, he seems to be very upset about that. Does that make sense?
Bilateral trade deficits make no sense whatsoever. To think of bilateral trade deficit, the best way to think of it is think of your household. In your household, you don't have bilateral balance of trade with your grocery store or your gas station or your car dealer or your insurance company. And it makes no more sense for a country to have bilateral balance of trade with every other country. So we need to recognize that first, the bilateral trade deficits or balance of trade makes no sense. But then we also have to recognize that to balance to trade overall is something that can't be addressed with trade policy or with tariffs. The president wants to impose tariffs to address the problem of balance of trade, but the reality is that we can't. The only way you can have balanced trade is if you have no net capital inflows into the country. And we know that lots of other countries like to invest in the United States, and we're very attractive. We also run huge federal budget deficits, which mean we need to have capital flowing. And the reality is we can't eliminate the trade deficit as long as we've got net capital inflows coming in.
Well, the president is also imposing tariffs on countries in which the United States enjoys a trade surplus, such as Eswatini, country in Africa, and South Sudan. Now, how can that policy be justified?
It can't. We have trades, or we have a trade surplus with Brazil also, and yet we put 50% import tariff on all Brazilian products. So it makes absolutely no sense to hit those countries with which we have a trade surplus. Supposedly, what the president wants is for us to have the trade, at least balance of trade, if not a surplus, with every country.
You mentioned Brazil. In that case, a tariff is being imposed on the country due to Trump's objection to the prosecution of their former president, Bolsonaro, for allegedly fomenting an attempted coup. Is there any precedent for utilizing trade policy in that fashion?
I'm unaware of any precedent for this. It makes no sense, and I don't believe there's a legal basis for doing it. The president can, the way the Constitution defines it, it reserves the role of setting tariffs for the U.S. Congress. But the Congress can delegate authority to the president, as they have a number of times. For example, if there's a national security basis for imposing those tariffs, or if there's a clearly documented case of unfair trade practices, such as the other countries subsidizing the exports of their product to us, then there's another act of Congress. It's called the International Emergency Economic Act. But to impose tariffs under that authority, the president has to declare a national emergency. Well, to impose tariffs on Brazil, with which we have a balance of trade surplus, because we don't like the fact that they convicted their former president of attempting a coup, I don't see how that satisfies the authority that's granted to the president for responding to unfair trade practices or national defense or a national emergency. It doesn't satisfy any of those three criteria.
Now, despite the president's actions, he can point to the fact that the stock market is seemingly unaffected by these policies. The market appears to be continuing to perform quite well despite everything that has taken place. How would you explain Wall Street's reaction or lack of reaction to trade policy?
Far be it for me to predict the price of how price of stocks are going to move, but I think there's a much better example to look at, and that's the bond market. And as we saw on April 2nd, when the president announced his agenda of very high tariff rates to be, he threatened to impose across basically the entire world. When that happened, the bond market tanked, which means if the price of bonds goes down, the interest rate goes up. And basically what was happening was the government of China, the government of Canada, many bondholders were losing confidence in the United States and saying, we're not going to hold as much U.S. government debt. We're going to dump it on the bond market. And as a result, I think the way the bond market reacted was very much an indication that the markets don't like what the president has done. Stock market is, in my estimation, clearly overvalued. My sense is that it's being driven principally by artificial intelligence stocks. You look at the fraction of the total increase in the valuation of the stock market, it's high-tech firms and principally artificial intelligence that's driven it. So as a result, the market is very frothy. I certainly expect a correction sometime in the next year. But so far, it's very hard to see that the president's economic policies had any effect on the stock market.
Well, we're going to have to pause our conversation for a short break. Now, audience, please stay with us when we return with more Inside Scoop and this fascinating discussion about trade policy. We'll be back shortly.
So, I just moved in with this family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born and I knew how to use the litter box. Look at that. That's disgusting. Uh-oh, poop already. You're making me nervous. Oh, okay, I can't look at this anymore. I really hope he grows out of this, for his sake.
So how was work?
It was 1,300 hours. My math class from 302 was in the trenches. Davy Roth had it the worst. Fractions were coming at him left and right. He just didn't get the damn things. 2 days ago, I tried to teach him what 1/4 and 1/2 was using different sizes of blocks. Yesterday, I tried again by dividing up pizza. Both missions failed. But today, I was ready. I created a combat math game where the only way to beat the enemy is to out-fraction them. Davy conquered every last denominator. My game was so successful, the principal is deploying it to math squadrons all over the school. Anywho, how was your day?
Oh, today my boss treated the office to salad wraps.
Salad wraps.
No.
150 over 90.
180 over 111.
160 over 110. I had a stroke.
This is what high blood pressure looks like. You might not feel its symptoms, but the results from a stroke are far from invisible or silent. If you've come off your treatment plan, get back on it or talk with your doctor to create an exercise, diet, and medication plan that works for you. Go to loweryourhbp.org.
If I would have followed a treatment plan, I would not be in this situation.
back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
I'm the host, Russell Brooks, joined by my guest, Dr. Robert Thompson. Let's continue. A major justification for the president's tariffs has been his desire to bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States. Are we likely to see a domestic manufacturing boom due to tariffs on the rest of the world?
I don't think we can count on it. We have to split this in two things. One is bring manufacturing back as a sector, and the second is how many jobs we create. To anticipate the result, I think we have to separate those two because modern manufacturing doesn't use that much labor. It's mostly robots, and so even if we bring manufacturing sector back, it's not going to bring back as many jobs as may have been lost in the past. And just to interject here, I think it's also important to remember that not all those automobile jobs from the upper Midwest, from Michigan and Indiana, went overseas. A lot of them went south. And in fact, the South is a major automobile manufacturing concentration today. But let's go back to the issue of bringing manufacturing back. If you put tariffs on to make it more profitable to produce goods in the United States, goods that we're not producing here, it probably means you're trying to bring back industries which were not as efficient at producing. It's also important to recognize that those sectors that we're likely to bring back are not very high-tech industries, and our comparative advantage today is very much more in high-tech industries, ones that use a lot of very skilled labor, engineers and scientists, rather than manual labor. So we've got, are we going to prop up industries that we don't have as much of a comparative advantage in? We're going to try to bring back industries that other countries can produce goods more efficiently at. But probably the clincher in all of this is we're putting 50% import duties on steel and 25% on aluminum. These are the most important raw materials going into heavy manufacturing. And so we've got, one, the possibility that other countries are more efficient at producing those products than we are. But two, we're tying one arm behind their back, if we will, by forcing them to pay significantly more than our competitors are having to pay for steel and aluminum. So if our competitors can buy steel at world market prices, and our companies have to pay 50% more, we're crippling the industry we're trying to bring back. And if we do rebuild manufacturing in those sectors that others are more efficient in today, then we end up actually reducing standard of living because we're allocating our capital resources, our skilled labor, into less productive sectors than we could be by investing according to our comparative advantage.
Isn't it true that even if manufacturing companies decided to invest in the United States, be they domestic or be they foreign, we will not see any results for many years to come, correct?
Investment there's a long lead time, and the other thing that I think we have to keep in mind is investors are not going to sink tens of millions or even billions of dollars into manufacturing capacity if they are not really confident that import protection, the tariffs, are going to be in place in the future. And this year we've seen that tariffs get announced, then they're delayed, then they're reduced. and there's so much uncertainty in the decision making today that I'm not seeing any investors getting enthusiastic, even with this high tariff protection. So no, there's a long lead time, and until they're really confident that these tariffs are in place and going to be unchangeable, we're not going to see that investment.
Mm-hmm. Now, to be fair to President Trump, the Biden administration was also an advocate for greater investment in domestic manufacturing. Yep. That's best represented by the CHIPS and Science Act that attracted the Taiwanese company TSMC to promise to build plants in Arizona. Intel and Samsung also received substantial federal dollars under the act. How does the Biden policy compare to Trump's tariffs for the purpose of spurring domestic manufacturing?
I think one has to say that the Biden policy was very much a continuation of the policy that Trump put in place. Some of us economists who believe that the Trump tariffs of the first administration were ill-advised were disappointed when the Biden administration kept those tariffs in place, because they were not. They're more likely to attract inefficient investment than investment that's going to significantly enhance our economic growth.
Mm-hmm. You talked about the fact that much of the work will be done by robots in modern manufacturing.
Yeah.
So for those jobs that will be available, obviously it requires certain skills that unfortunately maybe some Americans may not possess. What I don't hear being discussed is how we will increase the training, increase the quality of our labor in order to be able to fill the jobs that will be available or might be available in modern manufacturing.
Well, fortunately, there is significant increased interest in investing in training in the skilled trades. But when we're talking about modern manufacturing, which principally robot-based, we're talking about pretty high level of skills. And in fact, some of those chip companies that are investing in the United States are having a lot of trouble finding sufficient skilled labor to staff those plants. When we're talking about skilled trades, we're not talking just about plumbers and electricians and car mechanics.
Okay.
We're talking about another whole level up in skills, like to produce those highly sophisticated chips, mm-hmm. or to make as full use of artificial intelligence as possible.
Another similarity between the Biden administration and the Trump administration 1 and 2, is that skepticism about international trade agreements. Trump's negative views are well known, but I recall that the Biden administration was also reluctant to re-enter the Trans-Pacific Partnership, as an example. What accounts for this skepticism, and wouldn't trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership have been a useful tool in our competition with China?
The international trade agreements have greatly facilitated expansion of those industries in which we have the greatest comparative advantage. And we have benefited immensely by growing our involvement in international trade as a result of opening markets, as occurred with those international trade agreements in the past. Now, unfortunately, they're winners and they're losers. And any time you have trade liberalization. Now, economic theory tells us, or economic principles tell us, that the gains of the gainers exceed the losses of the losers, and therefore society as a whole ends up better off. Now, we have had a trade adjustment assistance program in the United States, and in fact, one of the strangest pairings in the United States Senate sponsored that legislation. We had Teddy Kennedy and Dan Quayle were the two sponsors of the trade adjustment assistance legislation when it went through Congress. Because basically what that does is recognizes in law that the gains of the gainers exceed the losses of the losers. And because society can end up better off, we can afford to compensate the losers for their losses. It may be in the form of retraining or physical relocation or compensating investors for the undepreciated capital assets that are in an industry that we're no longer competitive in. But we never really were serious about applying the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program. We used it more as a way to buy time, to try and keep the industry alive, maybe even as a zombie. But rather than saying, okay, we're no longer competitive in that sector, we've got to do something else with those resources, the capital, the labor, the facilities. And so because we never really, or at least this is my opinion, I don't think we never really applied the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program seriously. Opening markets got a bad name. It got a bad name because we did see job loss flowing overseas. And unfortunately, when you have that job loss, it tends to be a big hit in one community, and the benefits are spread widely across the entire society because everybody benefits from a little cheaper cost of living, a little higher cost of living than you otherwise, or a little higher level of living than you otherwise would be able to have. But those are very political events when a major employer closes up shop in a town. And they get lots of publicity. The widespread benefits of trade liberalization and opening trade, they don't get the press. And therefore, I think it gave trade agreements a bad name.
Well, I think you're absolutely right about that. And hopefully that can be corrected in the near future. It is time for another short break, so please stay tuned as we continue this riveting conversation with Dr. Robert Thompson when we return with more of our discussion of economics and trade policy on tonight's edition of Inside Scoop.
Oh, Spencer! I can't believe we broke Holman Hennessy's window.
Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball.
This is really bad. What are we gonna do? Really? Open the door. Ask for the ball back. Are you serious? It's my ball, Myrtleback.
You
So just I'd run away.
Yeah, to Uruguay.
Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry.
Let's go.
Yeah.
See you soon.
Yeah. I mean, you're wild. Nice morning. Some friends you are.
She's smiling and she's
Hi.
You
Hi.
can
Tell him it was an accident.
eyes on me.
And we can fix the window.
Sure.
Fun. I'll come with you.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats have dinner.
Not as a princess, and that's no good.
Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Yeah. Cause there's not a take another very nice little holy flag. For a gorgeous force, what you desire. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again.
But an awkward silence can be a great thing.
Like Tilly here's about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
I'm Russell Brooks, joined by tonight's guest, international trade expert, Dr. Robert Thompson. Let's continue. Returning to President Trump's tariffs, he consistently says foreign countries will pay these tariffs. Now, I was taught that tariffs are paid by the importers, who would be Americans in this case, and they often pass along some or all of the increased costs to the consumer. Am I mistaken?
You're absolutely right, Russell, that a tariff is a sales tax on imports, and a sales tax is paid by the customer. So when imports come into the United States from other countries, in order to get them out of customs, the import firm has to pay the customs duty. Now, if you're a Walmart, you may have enough power, purchasing power in the volumes that you buy, to force your supplier to maybe cut their price a little bit. And if you're a Walmart or a big import firm, maybe you're willing to shave your profit margin just a little bit on that import. But most of that import tax is the duty, or the tariff, is going to be borne by U.S. customers. So far, the research that I've seen suggests that at least 75% of the tariffs that have been imposed already have been passed through. Now, some people look at it and they say, prices haven't increased that much yet in the United States. Well, the first thing we have to recognize is when Trump threatened to really increase tariffs, our import firms rushed out and brought a lot of stuff in to get ahead of the higher tariff rates. So we're still working off a lot of that inventory that came in at lower tariff rates. Second, the very high tariff rates that the president announced on April 2nd, because of the terrible negative reaction the bond market had, he quickly backed off and said, well, we'll wait 90 days. And in the meantime, we can do some negotiation with other countries, maybe negotiate those tariff rates down. Whereas the average tariff rate was about 2.5% January 1st this year, it's now 18%. That's like an 18% sales tax. How, I think the question anybody has to ask themselves is, once that's all passed through, are we really happy with an 18% sales tax on top of stuff that we're buying from the rest of the world?
It sounds like a pretty aggressive sales tax.
It's a very aggressive sales tax, and it's 50% on everything we're buying from India and from Brazil. So it's 18 is the average.
The president also emphasizes the amount of money that the federal government is collecting thanks to the tariffs, sometimes suggesting that tariff collections could replace the income tax. What is your analysis of that idea?
No way, in a word. U.S. federal government spends about $6.5 trillion per year in outlays. It collects about $5 billion in taxes, almost all of which is income taxes. If we could bring in a few $100 billion per year in revenue from tariffs if we have $300 billion worth of imports. If we have about $1 trillion worth of imports and apply an 18% tariff rate to those, we'd get some increase in tariff revenue, but no, we don't. There's no reasonable tariff rate that you could generate enough revenue to offset the income tax.
Mm-hmm. The Trump administration suggests that tariffs could help reduce the federal deficit and thereby reduce our public debt. Is there any substance to that argument?
No, with the federal budget deficit of about $1.5 trillion, about closer to $2 trillion per year. I think it was 1.8 last year, and with the big beautiful budget bill that was passed this summer, I think the Congressional Budget Office's projection is that this will increase about $3.5 trillion over the next decade. So if divide that by 10, say it's $350 billion average increase in the federal deficit. There's just no way that the tariff revenue is going to compensate for that, and the question we have to ask is, or one question we have to ask is, a consumer tax is very regressive. Mm-hmm. The poor pay. Well, we have a progressive income tax system in this country because we feel that the rich or high-income taxpayers ought to pay a higher percentage of their tax than low income. You use a tariff just like a sales tax. It applies to everybody, but the rich don't spend everything on consumption. They have a lot of investment, and so a much larger percentage of your sales tax or your import tariffs is going to be borne by lower income consumers. Mm-hmm. So it's much more regressive than, in that sense, less fair.
I would also think that if you're counting on tariffs to reduce your deficit, it's kind of precarious, because I would imagine that over time, tariffs are going to be affected by the behavior of consumers and importers, who are going to respond, I guess, negatively to these high tariffs.
Well, when you raise the price, people are going to consume less. Their income doesn't stretch as far. You've got a finite amount of income to spend on buying things, and if you raise the price of things pretty much across the board, you're going to buy less of something, and so this is the balancing act. That any time you're using a sales tax or import tariffs, you can extract more tax revenue up to a point, but you push the price too high, your quantity bought drops, and as a result, you actually end up collecting less taxes. So no, it just doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. You talked about the bond market.
Yes.
But how are higher tariffs affecting interest rates? That concerns Americans greatly. So both in terms of both short and long-term rates, what are the effects?
Okay. And we do have to separate long-term from short-term, because we pay a lot of attention to the Federal Reserve setting interest rates. But the Federal Reserve is only setting interest rates at the very short end of the curve, if you will. Longer-term interest rates, like the ones we pay for a 30-year mortgage, they're set in the bond market. And there you're competing with the federal government, which has a lot of bonds to sell every year. Like if last year, if it had about $1.8 trillion shortfall in tax revenues relative to federal outlays, so the federal government had to spend or sell about $1.8 trillion worth of bonds to finance that shortfall. And Americans are very low savers. We normally don't save more than 2%. Even in the high years, we get up to about 4% of our income we were saving. But we're a relatively low saving society, only saving about 2%. So Americans won't buy that $1.8 trillion worth of federal debt that we've got to have to pay for what we're not generating in tax revenue, and so we have to sell those bonds to foreigners. Well, if foreigners get worried that the Federal Reserve is not going to keep interest rate or keep inflation rate down, then foreigners are going to demand a higher interest rate to compensate them for buying those U.S. federal bond or the U.S. federal budget deficit or federal debt, I should say, and so your if relationship between tariff rates and interest rates is probably less direct than it is between the federal budget deficit and the bond market. But the bond market sees interest or inflation rates rising, the more risk that they're going to be perceiving in buying U.S. government debt, and as a result, they're going to demand higher interest rates, and all of us then end up paying more for our mortgages.
I believe in your writings you've also suggested that high import tariffs are an invitation to corruption.
Indeed.
Anyone who has traveled overseas in the developing world is quite familiar with that phenomenon.
Well, I know you spent some time in Nigeria.
Yes, I have.
And, in many developing countries, the profession with the highest potential earning or highest earning potential is collector of customs or collector of import duties in the airports and with ships coming in. No, because basically it's an invitation to payoffs, to bribery. And I think we have to say that anytime the president has the power or assumes the power to be able to provide exemptions from import duties, and we've already seen quite a bit of that happening, or we did during the first Trump administration, and you seek favors from the president to forgive you having to pay the duty on steel or on aluminum or whatever the import is, and as a result, it may not be explicit bribery, but favors are provided. In low-income countries, it's overt bribery.
Yes, it makes us not so much different in those developing countries that both of us have worked in over the course of our careers. Well, once again, we must take a short break and then conclude with our final segment when we return with a bit more of this edition of Inside Scoop.
Every day across America, excess food is gathered by a network of good people at local food banks, giving hope to millions of children who struggle with hunger. They've earned their wings, and you can too. Together, we can solve child hunger. Support Feeding America and your local food bank at feedingamerica.org.
Hi, I'm Josh Temple. You might have seen me on TV where I help folks turn their houses into dream homes. But forget construction. Parenting is the toughest job there is. So when you need help or advice, turn to the parenting experts at Boys Town.
That's beautiful.
I was afraid of that.
Well, guess it's time to get you fixed.
Your pets will start fooling around sooner than you think.
Go on, get out of here!
Accidental litters lead to millions killed in shelters each year. Help prevent more. Fix at month 4.
Food. It nourishes, brings us together, and adds flavor to life. That's why it's important to wash hands, surfaces, and fresh produce. Keep raw meat, poultry, and seafood separate from ready-to-eat foods like fruits and vegetables. and cook to proper temperatures using a food thermometer. Enjoy and refrigerate leftovers within 2 hours. For more tips on safely preparing foods, visit homefoodsafety.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
And let's continue our conversation with Dr. Robert Thompson. I know that Trump's theory of the case depicts the U.S. economy as woeful. Before his arrival the second time around, he's described the U.S. economy as depressed, full of gloom. In fact, there were very competitive sectors of our economy, even under the Biden administration, and many remain quite strong today. Please describe your sense of the relative strengths and weaknesses of our economy.
Yeah, our economy was doing very well through the Biden administration. We had lost jobs in some sectors, but overall the economy was performing very well. One of the sectors where we've done extremely well over the years is commercial aircraft. Basically, Boeing and Airbus have that market
sewn up.
Sewn up, yeah. But we also have to recognize that the farm sector, American agriculture, has a great comparative advantage and was doing extremely well before the first Trump administration. Unfortunately, the trade war that broke out in the first Trump administration with China caused China to shift a significant amount of its agricultural imports to Brazil. In fact, China was taking about $30 billion worth of soybeans from the United States per year, and basically Brazil got 3/4 of that. American farmers suffered a loss of some $20 billion or so in export revenue as a result of those tariffs, or the retaliation to the tariffs we put on China. But then the farmers were given a bailout. In fact, they probably got about $2 billion more in compensation than the amount they actually lost in export revenue. But in the second administration, we've seen most of the rest of that Chinese market go away to both Brazil and Argentina. With the recent China agreement, we're getting a little of that back, but just a few boatloads of soybeans so far. But the U.S. in high tech is world premier. I mean, we have a great competitive strength because of our scientific and engineering prowess. Just look at every year when the Nobel Prizes are awarded across the various sciences. The U.S. is always right up there in the leadership. And that reflects the fact that we've made major investments in research. Public investments go into very basic research, developing the basic science, and on which we can then build new industries. And I worry that now that we're cutting the support for research across the sciences, and we're also making more difficult for international students to come to this country to study engineering and sciences. We've benefited tremendously in the past by keeping a lot of those scientists here in the U.S.
Sure.
In fact, you go to Silicon Valley, look at the ethnicity and the national origin of a lot of the CEOs and the major investors.
Of course.
They're immigrants.
Now, there are areas of our country, though, that were hollowed out by the loss of manufacturing
Clearly.
and decline of certain traditional industries.
Yep.
Is it possible to revive those hollowed out areas of our country known as the Rust Belt?
I think it's going to be very difficult to bring the jobs back. If we bring the industries back, there are going to be a lot more robots than there were when the industry left. Because even in China today, You go visit automobile factories, you don't have many people on the line. It's all robots doing it, even in China. Of course, wage rates have been bid up in China to such an extent that any labor, or particularly unskilled labor-intensive manufacturing jobs, have moved offshore from China. They've moved to India or Vietnam or Cambodia. So I think the unskilled manufacturing jobs, I don't have much expectation we're going to attract many of them back.
The unskilled jobs. But we talked earlier about the possibility of training our workers for higher level jobs
Absolutely.
where we would be competitive.
Oh, clearly. And as we mentioned before, those chip manufacturers who are making investments in the U.S., such as the Taiwan firm, they're having trouble finding enough labor to staff those chip manufacturing plants. There's no reason we can't do it. We've got to make the investment in people, though.
Sure.
So there are two areas that we've really got to keep our eye on the target. One is investments in research to keep our leadership in science and engineering, and in bringing the skill level up so that we can compete in those intermediate to high level technology jobs.
In a recent article, you described the support Trump has received from American farmers and how he has worked to support them. Virginia has its fair share of farmers. How has the Trump administration's latest tariffs helped or hurt American farmers?
The recent tariffs have hurt farmers. They have, agriculture is principally an export industry, and so farm increases in farm production are not going to go to domestics. We're well fed in this country. We have such fertile soil, such favorable climatic conditions, such low-cost river transport system down the Ohio and Missouri and Mississippi river system to New Orleans, that we have a great comparative advantage. We can grow 3 to 4 times more food than we can consume. So tariffs are the most likely effect of us putting import tariffs on products into the U.S. is other countries are going to retaliate against our farm product exports, as China has, because China's been very astute politically. They recognize that a lot of American agriculture's prowess resides in red states. They voted very strongly for President Trump, and they're basically trying to hurt us where they can most easily get the attention of the president. And so you hurt us in red states, and agriculture's been a prime target for that. So as a result, generally agriculture's been hurt by the loss of export markets that retaliation has caused. It's very sad, in fact, when farmers can earn their income from the marketplace, but instead we end up putting them on the government dole to compensate them for sales that were in their pocket, but evaporated as part of the retaliation against the import tariffs that have been levied.
The rationale for the tariffs was to enhance our ability to compete effectively against China. If tariffs are not the appropriate way, what would be your thoughts about a more appropriate strategy to compete effectively with China?
Invest in research and in human capital. That's where our federal dollars should go. The private sector will take care of the rest, but you've got to have the skilled workforce, and there are many areas of research where the potential payoff is too far in the future or too uncertain for the private sector to make what I would call the socially optimum level of investment in basic research. That's where the federal government has a huge multiplier on the investments it makes. Infrastructure, our infrastructure is falling apart. You look at the roads and bridges that are in terrible shape across the country. This is another public good where we need the public sector, not necessarily the federal government, although it has a role, to keep our infrastructure intact, to keep the cost of transport down. And this may be locks and dams on the Mississippi. It may be roads or bridges. It may be our railroads. But to keep the cost of moving goods into the export channels, that I would put up there with research and human capital formation.
Mm-hmm. There was a lot of talk during the Biden administration in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic about our great need to focus on nearshoring and friendshoring to alleviate the supply chain problems that developed, again, due to the pandemic. I don't hear much about that these days.
Once the pandemic was over, the global supply chains worked very well once again. Just-in-time delivery was alive and well and working effectively. Again, we want to produce things in the places that can do them most efficiently and at lowest cost. And then, so we have industries now where in the course of producing a product, it may move back and forth across international borders 6, 8, 10 times.
Like with Canada or Mexico.
North American automobile industry was totally integrated. Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, particularly going back and forth between Detroit and Windsor, Ontario. Some things were done in Canada, some things on the U.S. side could be multiple times across that border. Mexico is now well integrated into that system. Even in agriculture, in our livestock sector, cattle sector, cattle may move back and forth between Canada and the U.S. or between Mexico and the U.S., depending on what phase of their production cycle.
Well, thank you. I think we're going to have to wind it up. We've had a great discussion tonight, but we are out of time. So let me thank you, Dr. Thompson, for an enlightening discussion. I know I enjoyed it very much, and I hope you will come back soon. And I hope the audience will, again, join us for another edition next week, when we return for another program on this great series called Inside Scoop. Good night.